So in this video, I want to talk about developing a project proposal. And in previous classes in CH 500, you really did a lot of stuff that you probably are already or have been doing in this class, which is to explore different topics and different types of science, processes, some of the data, some of the results, some of the ideas. But this next part of this lab, the second half, is really focused on you developing something different and unique and innovative. So something different that you're going to look at and explore, and you're going to create a proposal for doing that in the second half with a written plan. So some key features of this plan, we're going to talk about why does my project need to be done, who's my audience, and what goes into the proposal. And the last part's probably the biggest component of this short little video. So when we're looking at a project proposal, one of the big things that we have to think about is, why are we doing it? What is the point of the project? Who's going to benefit from the project, and who's your audience? Who are you delivering this to? So a lot of times it's good to start off with the big picture ideas. So what big picture thing are you trying to solve? What problem is there out there that you want to look at? And really, you want to start your proposal, start your project, talking about some of these big ideas. Now, you're not going to maybe solve world hunger, but maybe some little aspect of your project will. So the scope is important. You want to start off with a big idea, a big scope, and then you want to kind of focus it in and funnel it in to the specific topic that's doable enough for you to kind of at least propose some small, at least minimally, some type of project that you could actually do yourself. These types of project proposals are pretty common in the scientific world, where you might be asking the National Institutes of Health for funding, or the National Science Foundation, or maybe just your school district, or someone that you are working with. So this proposal is to kind of ask for support from people that might have funding or give you time to work on these things. So even if we're not going to do this in the future, that's fine. But this exercise is just in order to give you an idea and some guidelines for how to go about doing that. If that is something that you wanted to do, if you wanted to work on this in the future, this is how scientists go about getting to that work and being funded for that work. To start off with, we need to make sure that we have a good idea, right? That we're solving a problem that needs to be solved. So that's the big picture idea that I spoke about on that last slide. Now we need to also include and incorporate evidence that supports why we need to do these things, and that there are maybe avenues for solving that problem through different means or different ideas. So we have to support our idea with some evidence, things that maybe have been done in the past that did work or didn't work, and that should all be kind of included in here. And we'll talk about exactly where that goes into the project, but these are all things that you want to be thinking about when you're thinking about how you're going to design your project and what area of that project and that domain that you're going to kind of focus on. And figures are a big part of this, and especially that's why I like you to present some figures and present those things in your presentations, because those are the crux. That's a lot of the foundation of the evidence that you'll probably need to provide in your background part of your writing. And then the other part of this is why your project needs to be done. So what things have you thought of during the semester that maybe you've identified other avenues or other areas, or maybe there's just not enough information about it? Those are really great places to actually explore. Maybe if there's not that much information, you can start to explore there and propose some other research. Remember, again, you don't have to cure cancer. You don't have to do the experiment that's going to be run in humans. Sometimes those experiments are too difficult to set up, and there's not enough information to provide evidence that those are the things you want to do. And moving into animal models or more simple systems, that is what I would recommend focusing on. Otherwise, there are a lot of other controls and problems that you might come into if you try to make too grand of a proposal for this type of proposal project that we're working on. So these are the main components that should be in your draft. And what I will kind of walk through each of these individually and just briefly right now. The background is kind of like a literature review. I didn't teach Chem 500. I'm assuming perhaps that you did something like this where you created a lit review about a certain topic. So that's that. A lot of that, if you did that, could go into that type of the background, the first part. Then the next part is you can typically want to transition through these and then transition from this is the problem, this is where we're at, and we're missing this, this, and this. And those would be your aims then. So the goals of based on the why. Why are we doing this? So the aim of my project is to find something, and then you would go on to then explore that in certain aims. And I'll talk about that in more detail. But your aims should be based on the background and the things that are missing from the background. Proposed research is where you now define what you're going to do, how you're going to study it. So tools, techniques, and details about what it is that you're doing, how you're setting up the experiments that you think should be run. The expected results and potential pitfalls. So then you propose what you're going to study, and then you're going to predict what will happen in that proposed work. And then your references will be kind of based on all of the things that you cited throughout that process. So now we're moving from kind of the lit review from 500. Now we're mostly focusing on the future. What is it that we could do to look at this and explore this that hasn't been done before, that's unique and different and innovative, that's going to get us closer to solving the problem that we're looking at. So in this section, I'll just go into those in a little more detail, just to give you an idea of what I'm looking for, maybe some examples in a few of them. So the background, again, this is similar to a literature review, some of the studies, key findings, and to highlight some of the gaps in the current knowledge. You should also clearly define how things are being studied, and especially if you're going to use similar tools or techniques in your proposed work. So if you think you're going to do mass spectrometry, you need to explain that background and identify papers that have looked at that or used that tool so that we have an understanding of what that should look like. And that'll also help you when you're predicting what things should look like. That'll already kind of be in your background, some of the information there. So that all has to build and make sense for the reader, for who is looking at that and trying to understand what you're looking at. So some key components for a good background. I said earlier, you want to start with a big picture. Who and what would be impacted by that project? And you can be big, right? Start with this big picture. Even if your little mini project isn't going to, again, cure cancer, that's fine, but that's maybe the idea. That's the big problem. And you're going to focus on one of those details. So you kind of start big and then you funnel into that idea as you go throughout your background, as you keep writing down into multiple paragraphs. A good idea to make sure that you're transitioning and making clear connections from the end of one paragraph to the next, the beginning of the next paragraph. Blend those paragraphs and even those sections. So you might use section headings. So you might have something like cancer in dolphin cells, and then you might go down to a different CMAP kinase that's involved in cancer cells, and then you might dig into that deeper and CMAP signal transduction processes and inhibitors or whatever. So you might have these different sections, but then they should transition from one to the next in a clear, concise way. Make sure that you're including the necessary science that you're going to maybe be using or proposing in your proposal for your studies that you want to look at. And make sure that looking at figure, legends, texts, and different techniques. So these are all important ideas. So next slide, I have some information about some of these last bullet points. So here's an example and something you might want to start with, and especially for your first draft, make sure that you start with a good outline. So it's a good way to start and a good way to kind of like see where your roadmap is going to go for your proposal. So an example, maybe I want to look at rechargeable batteries and their uses. We have tons of batteries. People are putting solar panels up. This is the big picture idea. And I want to start with looking at, we use rechargeable batteries in transportation, a lot of electric vehicles coming on the roads. We use them in our cell phones and maybe our smartwatches or other areas for electronics. Then you might want to go into what are some common technologies that we use. Lithium batteries, what is the chemical structure? What are the energy characteristics? How much energy do they hold? How long do they last? What are some of the scientific things about batteries that we might look into that? Maybe we want to look into a novel type of sodium chloride battery, and so these are more new. There's less information about them, but we have a little bit of information, and maybe those are the ones we want to look at. And then emerging technologies in new directions. So this is just this is the first step for kind of making that and formatting that idea and that background. And of course, there's more than one way to create a background or to create something and how we want to put it into our style, right? So, and this is the same kind of idea. In example 2, maybe we want to start with transportation and reducing greenhouse gases, and we look at all of the ways that we use energy, and we want to start with that. So we want to talk about that first. And then we have maybe a header that says, okay, techniques for studying chemical reactions and energy characteristics of batteries. So then we can go through, hey, people use this spectrophotometry, or they use this type of experiment to study the batteries and how they work. So maybe you have another header here. And then we want to specifically look at 2 different kinds, lithium batteries and sodium chloride batteries. So you might have different ways of organizing this, and you might move those around later, and that's fine. Once you start writing paragraphs and you developing your transitions from one section to another, maybe it makes sense to have a different organization, and that's fine. But a good starting point is always good outlines, so that's a good way to start so people have a good idea of where you're going with here. The next thing I want to touch on, also something that a lot of people kind of don't recognize when they're writing these scientific journals or articles or even the project proposals, are the in-text citations. So if I have a figure, and I would highly recommend having a few figures in your background, it is helpful for the reader to see what you're doing. It's helpful for you to kind of create some of these images and ideas so that you can digest what's happening in the literature and kind of create your own models and ideas and systems. So these figures are really, really valuable, and I really like to see those, and you get a lot of benefits, and I think I tend to grade those when I see those. I love to see those, and I think that means that you put a lot of effort and thought into this. So figures should be in your background, and then also make sure you're putting in-text citations for any figure. So if I have figure 1 here, it should and must be somewhere in the text cited. So figure 1, and maybe that's somewhere also, this was from somewhere else. So you want to have figure 1 in here, so that figure 2, figure 3, all of them, if you have a figure, it has to be cited. So that's one area we want to make sure things are cited. And then the other thing we want to do is when we have references, so just something else that when we're doing figures, you might need to create your own. So maybe you can't find something that's perfect, or you might need to modify. Maybe it has like 15 panels and you just want to use the panel A. Then you might need to modify the figure and the figure legend. So you cut out that panel, and in your writing, it's maybe figure 2. You could write the description of what's in that figure and then just say modified and found from whatever the reference is. So I can help you with the referencing that, but don't think that you have to use entire panels of figures if there's only one that really is relevant to the work or the things that you're focusing on. So then the other thing is just, again, also any reference that you have in your acknowledgments page or your references page, that should be cited somewhere in your work. So an in-text citation, and you can use the style that you feel comfortable with. If it's MLA, APA, whatever you want to do, I don't really care as long as you're consistent with the formatting of that throughout the paper. Once you've provided your audience with kind of the background and the problem and set everything up, now you want to talk about what your aims are for the proposal. What is it that you want to solve specifically? So you want to take that problem and you want to focus on some concrete things that you can generate some data from and set up an experiment or two. And so it doesn't have to be huge. Again, you don't have to cure cancer. It should be a little thing that you can set up, that you can envision. And you're not required to. Don't worry, you don't have to do this. But it should be something you feel like you could realistically do fairly easily. Maybe in a semester or a year, I'm going to set up some experiments. I'm going to run these. And again, we're not asking you to do that, but we want you to pretend that you plan to do that. So the idea is that these should be novel and unique ideas, stuff that's missing, stuff that hasn't been done yet. And it should be realistic and doable. So those are some of the things that I'm looking for when I'm grading these aims. So what you want to have here are what are your research questions. So articulate specific questions that you can use to address. What's your hypothesis? And you should have provided some of that information in the background. And then your objectives. So what are the main goals? And then do you have multiple different aims for this? So here's just another example of maybe an idea of some aims. And it doesn't have to be, you can have aims and then a little bit of a few paragraphs describing this. This doesn't have to be a huge section, but it should kind of tie some of the background in with what you want to do. So your example might be one of the aims, and you can have one aim and you can have 3 aims. You don't probably want 15 aims. You want 1 to 3 is a good number. But here's an example. So thinking about that energy thing, aim 1, define the energy capacities of novel sodium chloride batteries using calorimetry and electrochemical techniques. Aim 2, explore the effects of heavy metal titration on energy capacities of sodium chloride batteries. Aim 3, develop batteries with improved energy capacities at temperatures below freezing. So these are little things that we could do to look at energy and batteries and some of these ideas that maybe I discussed in the background. And you could talk about, these things haven't been done yet, and this is why I don't want to do these, and give some reasons for your aims. But that's mostly what is just kind of to focus your project. Now for your proposed project. So here again, this is where we want to step back, and now we're going to provide some details about our research and our design. We want to describe the overall process. What are the observations? What are the techniques and the methods and the tools that we need and that we'll be using? How are we analyzing the data? Are there statistical tests or tools or things that we need to use to be able to understand if what our results are going to show us? Timelines, something like we want to look at this timeline. We think, this should happen. Let's say we have to look at the timeline because our experiment requires it. So if we have to look over a week to see energy, kind of energy levels of our batteries and how they last, or maybe we have to look over a year of charging and discharging them, something. So that all depends on what exactly you're proposing. So again, outlines are a good way to start this process. And sometimes it's easier to create figures and tables to help organize your plan. So that's fine to also include figures or proposals in your proposal, in your research proposal part. So this proposed work, sometimes it's easier to kind of create these diagrams or flowcharts to help understand how things are going to work. And then you can reference that in your written materials as well. And the last major component of your proposal should be an expected results section where you talk about what your expectations are, what are really your hypotheses, and how do you think those would turn out. And you can, again, this should be based on what other things in the field are saying, or where there are holes, but you have kind of an inkling of what might happen. So it could happen, or maybe it won't happen. You just make your best guess and make suggestions on what you might see, and then what challenges or other things that might happen during your proposal. So maybe you plan to look at batteries, and then maybe you might say batteries don't work under negative 20 degrees at all. None of them. None of the ones that we found or we used worked, so we really couldn't do aim 3. It just wouldn't work. So you don't know, you can kind of predict and make some guesses, and you just want to talk about those and talk about some of the pitfalls. And maybe if that's the case, maybe you say, well, we can't do anything that cold, but maybe we want to look at if they're too warm. Maybe we want to increase the temperature and see What are the, areas? So talk about some of those pitfalls, talk about some of those things that might go wrong or how you would make adjustments to that. So it's a lot of predictions. It's a lot about thinking through the problem and making plans for things that might go wrong. And so it's just a thought puzzle kind of. So again, figures are great here. Add figures, make figures that, this is just something made up. Maybe this is, for example, figure expected results 1, prediction of gel electrophoresis results of genetic material from, these 2 different made up bacteria that are going to be expressing things that, I put in there. So you can make things up, you can make a figure, you can kind of make some tables and some predictions. Just make it known, like, this is a prediction, this is what I would expect to see. You can make bullet points, you can do kind of whatever you want in here, but it should just be thinking about some expected results, how you'd interpret those results, and then maybe how you might fix that or adjust things if something were to go wrong, or where things you think might go wrong. Finally, the references. This is just your citations. So you should mostly have a lot of this already in your annotated bibliography from that assignment. Take out the annotations, just leave the references there. And then make sure that all of your references are included in your written text somewhere. So include all of those references and in-text citations. Make sure that they're all labeled. You can do them multiple ways. You can number them. You can have like figure 1, 2, or reference 1, 2, 3. You can number them with parentheses around them, or you can have, last name and then the date, or however you want to do it. Again, I'm not concerned with the exact, if it's APA, MLA, whatever style. I just want you to be consistent throughout the process. So just make sure that you're including any reference should be cited somewhere in the text. Otherwise, if it's not, then don't include it in the back end in the references section. So that's really all I wanted to talk about. So I hope that helps you at least get started and provides you a little bit of a background of what I'm looking for, and helps you focus on some of the important aspects of the proposal. So again, I think a good place to start is to create a good outline. And that's a great place to start to help you organize what you're looking for and what you want to build.